guys, I didn't time it exactly right, but I got back and I got 999. Alright guys, finally got it exactly 1,000 miles, so now we can do the 1,000 mile service. Well, good morning YouTube. Alright guys, in today's video, we've got Dr. Evil up on the lift. It is time to do the 1,000 mile service, and as you just saw, I got it at exactly 1,000 miles, and then we pulled it onto the lift. So we're going to go by the book according to the service manual, step by step, on how to do your 1,000 mile service, so that if you wanted to do it yourself at home, you can. And if you're worried about warranty, it is not a violation of your warranty for you to do the service yourself, as long as you can document that it was done. So keep track, keep your receipts for all your products, and document it. Take pictures, make a video, whatever. Show that it was done at the right mileage interval, and they cannot void your warranty for it. It's against federal law. They might try to make you think it's a violation, but it is not. All right, and one of the most important things about a 1,000 mile service is changing out all of your fluids in the engine, the transmission, and the primary. When an engine is new, you get a lot of break-in wear. As things move around, you get a little bit of metal particles and just wear in the engine, and you want to get all of that out of there. So that's the first thing we're going to do, is go ahead and drain the oils. We'll inspect our plugs to see what kind of contaminants we might have in there, and then we'll move through to doing the rest of the safety checklist, which is actually relatively simple. All right, on the Milwaukee 8 engines, you have 3 drain plugs. One here in the bottom of the primary, right below the derby cover. Got one just up in here on the bottom of the pan for the transmission, and then one right here facing forward for the engine oil. Right, so I've got a nice clean drain pan. I've cleaned it all out, that way I can see if any contaminants fall. Now the drain plugs are magnetic, so if there's anything that is steel or a ferrous metal, it should stick to it. But it's not going to pick up any non-ferrous metal, so that you're going to see in the pan afterwards. So I want to make sure that the pan was nice and clean. And before I pull the plugs all the way out, I'm going to go ahead and check all of my fluid levels to see where they're at, make sure nothing is transferred. That way I can accurately see what's in each compartment at this point. All right guys, so I've got the Figurati dipstick in here that's got the magnet in it, and look, there's definitely some particles on that magnet. So that's stuff that we caught that the drain plug may not have caught. All right, so I've got it all cleaned off. Now I'm putting it back in and double checking to see where our level is. And we are right there at the bottom of the safe zone. All right, so now we're gonna check the transmission fluid level. I'm turning out this dipstick. Now this is something I really don't like about the new bikes, is these plastic dipsticks. Let's see, where is that level on there? Focus. All right, looks like our level is good. There you go, I cleaned it and put it back in. Now you can see a little bit better. It's right on the money. All right, so I pulled the derby cover off because that's the only way to inspect the fluid level in there. And you can see that the clutch basket is just dipping into the oil, which is exactly the way it should be. So although the engine oil was just a tiny bit lower than what I'd like it to be, it was well within that safe zone and no harm there. So I actually took my derby cover next door to Monte. He's a pinstriper here and he's really good at what he does. And when they had Elroy pinstripe the bike at the dealership before I bought it, for some reason he didn't do the 117 that was in the derby cover. And I just think that that got missed, and it should have been done to match the rest of the theme. So while the derby cover's off, I just took it to Monty. It makes it a whole lot easier than having to take the whole bike to him. But now that we know all the levels are good, we're gonna go ahead and drain the fluids one at a time, that we kind of inspect them and see what's going on. I'm gonna start with the transmission, because this one you gotta reach the furthest under to get to. That way you're not running your hand through the engine oil or the primary oil in order to unscrew that one. Don't see any major contaminants. These little white speckles, that's actually from the Teflon that's on the plug. And as you can see, the drain plug didn't have any major contaminants on it. And if I look at the fluid here in the pan with the sun shining on it, you can definitely see that there's a glisten of metallic in there, which is perfectly normal for a brand new engine doing a break-in process. Definitely see the fine little metallic particles, but nothing really to worry about. Okay, with the pan cleaned again, we're going to pull out the engine oil drain plug. Once again, drain plug looks pretty good. Definitely a little bit more discoloration, which is normal. Still don't see any big chunks, anything to worry about. All right, and last but not least, we will pull the plug for the primary. Now there's always going to be some kind of fibers in here from the clutch material, and that's perfectly normal. And that's why it's so much darker of a color. That's because the clutch is a wear item and it will leave remnants of its wear in the oil. And that fuzzy on the drain plug, that's quite typical of clutch friction material being left on it. That's actually nothing to worry about. All right, and again, nothing in that fluid that is alarming in the least bit. So now we're gonna go ahead and pull the oil filter off. Way too tight. We need a different filter wrench. All right, guys, the first filter wrench I tried wouldn't work. The dealer has got this filter on there so tight, it took everything I had to break it loose. Not necessary, but there we go. It's loose now. With the horn placement, it makes it a little challenging to get the filter out. All right, now that everything is drained and the filter is removed, I take a few minutes and I really clean my drain plugs good, make sure the magnets are clean, I'll make sure all the threads are clean, and I reapply some thread dope on there. It's a Teflon-based thread sealant. Now, I opted to reuse my O-rings because in a 1,000-mile service, these O-rings are in really good shape. There's really no reason to replace them. But if you disagree with that, feel free to replace yours. It's a choice, it really is. I know the dealership will tell you to replace them every single time, but a good O-ring is a good O-ring. And with thread sealant on there as well, I'm not really concerned about much of a leak. But these O-rings are in really good shape. We'll change them on the next oil change. Now, with that said, make sure that when you put the Teflon on the threads, make sure you don't get any on the top. We don't want it getting in the oil system. As we thread this in, it will push any excess out. All right, now the bike has had ample time to drain. We're still got a little drip here and there, but for the most part, everything is drained. So we're going to reinstall our drain plugs one by one. I always make sure to start each drain plug by hand. You never use the wrench to get it started. You make sure you get it in as finger tight, and then just use the wrench to snug it up. That way you know you're not going to cross thread anything. Hey guys, the torque setting on these is really low, so you want to make sure not to over torque them. Hey guys, remember a little while ago I said I took my derby cover over to Monty? Well, it turns out he let Sydney do it, and she did an awesome job. Check it out, guys. All right, Harley Davidson recommends that you torque those drain plugs between 14 and 21 foot-pounds. So I got to be a little bit honest here. I don't typically use a torque wrench to do this. I've got a feel. I mean, I've done thousands and thousands of these. I know how they feel. If you over tighten them, you'll squish the O-ring out. So the service or the owner's manual specifically says 14 to 21 foot-pounds. I set the torque wrench at 18 foot-pounds, and when it clicked, I checked, and it had squeezed my O-ring out. So I think that's too much. I'm going to pull the plugs out, redo it, and set it at 14 and see how that does. Upon removal of the plug, you can see that there's still some O-ring on there, but it's definitely not damaged, and the remainder of it is right there. It cut it. All right, guys, so I re-cleaned the drain plug, put a brand new O-ring on it, and a fresh coat of pipe dope on there. We're gonna reinstall it, try this again. All right, and now the torque wrench is reset at 14 foot-pounds. Still feels too tight to me. Right there. Well, the nice thing is it did not cut the O-ring that time. So 14 foot-pounds it is, and that's still tighter than I like it to be. Okay, in preparation for the new filter, we're gonna reach in there and wipe our surface clean. Give it a visual inspection, make sure there's no debris or anything on there. And then we've got a tiny bit of fresh, clean oil on the filter, and we're just gonna dab our finger in it and lubricate this O-ring. Just a nice, light, thin coating. Now we're just gonna spin the filter on by hand until the gasket fully seats against the gasket surface. Okay, word for word, the manual says, hand tighten oil filter 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn after the gasket first contacts the mounting surface. Do not use an oil filter wrench. Okay, so now here's my personal experience. I do put the oil filter wrench on there and I snug it down, and I do it a little bit more than what the book says. Just go by feel. You don't have to crank it down tight. But I've seen a lot of motorcycles come in with loose oil filters, and if you put it on exactly like that says, if you do it to the word where it says the moment it touches, then you just turn it that quarter turn, you're gonna have the filter come loose. You want it seated and then like a quarter to half a turn or so, and you'll feel it. You don't have to muscle it, but you'll feel it. And my hands are so big, I can't do it by hand. I have to use the oil filter wrench. I have to. Just be smart about it. All right, so now that the new filter is on and all 3 drain plugs are in and snug down to the proper torque, it is time to refill all of the compartments with the appropriate fluid. So you guys know we're only using Amsoil, so we're gonna use the Amsoil primary fluid. In the primary, we're gonna pour 1 full quart in there and see where it comes up to on the level. And we've got these special funnels, just make it easy to pour the oil in there. All right, and the capacity for the primary, it says if it's a dry fill, is 34 ounces. Now we weren't dry because, you know, we just drained oil. A wet fill is only 30 ounces. And I poured an entire quart in there, which is 32 ounces. But what's really important is that the clutch basket dips into the oil like we had when we started. It even says that right here, note number 1, amount is approximate. Fill to the bottom of pressure plate, outer diameter with vehicle upright. Vehicle's upright, that's where we're gonna fill it to. All right, if you look in there, you can clearly see that the pressure plate, the clutch basket is just dipping into the oil. That one's out, that one's in, the next one is out. So perfect. At this point, we can clean our mating surfaces both on the outer primary and on the derby cover for mating. Now the manual will tell you to replace that silicone gasket that's in there. Don't waste your money, guys. That silicone gasket can be reused over and over and over and over again. Obviously, look at it, make sure it's not damaged. I have never in my career had to replace one of those, and I've never had a leak. They charge you $30-something, I think, for that seal, and you just don't have to do it every time. So ours is in really good condition, And with only 1,000 miles on it, there's no reason I would expect not, but you can see it clearly protrudes from the groove. It's going to make a seal against the flat surface. All right, and the fasteners for the derby cover should be torqued in a sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And they should be torqued between 84 and 108 inch-pounds. Now, I actually didn't bring an inch-pound torque wrench with me. I forgot it, it's in the shop. And my foot-pound one will only go down to 10 pounds. And if you convert 108 inch-pounds, it comes out to about 9 foot-pounds. So I don't know how accurate that would be with the big one anyways, but I know how tight these are supposed to be. I still do the star pattern, and I actually do it in 2 stages. I will get all 5 to seat, and then I will go back again and just give each one like that 1/8 or 1/4 of a turn until they feel snug, but I still do it in the pattern. Now, I will say, if you over tighten these, it's really easy to strip these out trying to get them back out the next time. They don't have to be real tight. That silicone seal back there actually keeps enough pressure on it where they generally don't rattle loose unless you leave them really loose. So just get them good and snug in a good safe pattern. All right, now in the transmission, we're gonna use the Amsoil transmission fluid. This is engineered specifically for the Harley Davidson transmission, and it works really, really well. Again, we're gonna pour the entire quart in there. Spec says, I think 28 to 32 ounces. We're just gonna pour all 32 in. All right, more specifically, it says the wet fill is 30 ounces. The dry fill is 34 ounces. Now, this was technically a wet fill, but we had this bike warmed up really, really good. I had just done a bunch of riding on it. Engine temperature was at 235 degrees according to the ECM. It was good and hot when we drained it, and we let it drain a long time. We didn't just drain it and fill it back up. So we're going for the full 32 ounces right in the middle of the spec. And here's where I get a little bit of a discrepancy here in the manual. So on the capacities table, it says that the transmission approximate is 32 ounces. When you come back to the actual transmission service section, it says 28 ounces. So I'm assuming 28 is the wet fill and the 32 would be the dry fill. But we let this drain a little extra long. We're putting the full 32 in there, and we're gonna see where it's at. I can always drain a little out if it's too much, but 90% of the time, I can tell you that 32 ounces puts it right where it needs to be. All right, so now we're checking it with the dipstick screwed in. We'll see exactly where it's at. There we go, right at the full mark. Couldn't get any better than that. Now you'll see that it actually read a tiny bit high there, but that's because the bike is upright, and according to the manual, you're supposed to check the transmission fluid with the bike on the side stand, and it should be between that add and that full mark. And we were just barely above the full mark with it upright, so we know we're good. Guys, now it's time to add the engine oil. Of course, we're going to use the Amsoil MCV 20W50s 100% synthetic motorcycle oil. We're going to fill the tank right here. The book says to start with 4 quarts cold, warm the bike up, and then double check and bring back up to the proper levels after that. I know from experience it takes right about 4.4 to 4.5. So we're going to go grab the oil gun and start filling. All right, guys, I stopped on 4.05 quarts. We'll check it with the dipstick, and we'll see how it reads. All right, so we are definitely in the safe zone, actually kind of towards the higher end. So let's run it, and when it primes, that level should drop. All right, on initial startup, you might hear a little extra clatter because as you've taken that filter off and drained that oil, you've introduced air pockets into the system. And as that air pocket moves through the lifters, the push rods, so on and so forth, you're gonna hear a little clatter, but it should go away within a few moments. At this point, while it's running, we're gonna double check, make sure that our oil filter's not leaking, none of our drain plugs are leaking, there are no leaks anywhere. And then we'll let it warm up just a little bit, and we'll double check that oil level. so we let it run a good 5 or 6 minutes. I let the fan cycle multiple times. The engine is definitely good and hot. Now we're going to double check that oil level and see how it reads on the stick. All right, so I wiped the stick clean, put it back in, and double check it again. Oops. Can't get it to focus. All right, we're still at the lower end of it, so I'm gonna add a little bit more. All right, so I've taken it up to a total of 4.4 quarts. Let's check it again. And there we go again. All right, now we're just like 3 hashes below the full line. I'm happy with that. Okay guys, now that all of the lubrication points have been taken care of here, engine, transmission, and the primary drive, now there's the full checklist of all the other things that need to be checked at the 1,000-mile service. Now, 90% of these are a visual inspection. You're just making sure that there isn't a problem. And you don't have to do everything on this list at the 1,000-mile, but it will tell you which ones you need to check, which ones you don't. Okay, first thing on the list is electrical equipment and switches. You want to inspect them at the 1,000-mile service. So you'll see here, this is the 1,000-mile, 5,010, 1520, so on and so forth. So we're gonna find everything in this list and we're gonna follow it down here. If it's got an X, we're gonna check it. Now, because this is my personal motorcycle, I am not gonna walk around and check all the electrical switches because I ride this bike every day, so I know that they're all good. But if this were a customer's motorcycle, I would walk around and check the turn signals, headlights, all that stuff, make sure that every button you push does what it's supposed to do. All right, and it wants us to check the front air pressure in the tire as well as the tread depth. Now with 1,000 miles, you should not have an issue with tread depth. And I know that the onboard air pressure system, the TPMS, is telling me that my tire pressure is a little bit low. So we're gonna break out the tire gauge and check both tires while we've got it out. Now Harley Davidson calls for 36 pounds in the front and 40 to 41 pounds in the rear. I like mine just a little bit softer than that. The 36 is good. I'll probably run the rear at like 38 or so. And of course I couldn't get to the valve stem, so I had to pull out the flat jack. That way I could rotate the wheel around to get it where I want it. Got those all adjusted, and hopefully now my TPMS sensor on the dash will be happy again. You know, it just started when we got here to Ocean City, and I think it's because there's a significant temperature drop from where we came from. So temperature definitely has an effect on air density. So it probably reduced that pressure inside the tire. It wasn't dangerous low, it was just a couple of pounds below the target that it likes, so it was just giving me that warning. Hopefully now that'll all go away. Okay, next it says for front wheel spoke tightness. Well, we've got a mag wheel, so that doesn't apply to us, so we skip. Front brake fluid level, so let's visually inspect that. All right guys, so taking a look at the brake fluid in the reservoir, and looks like we're plenty full. I know it's hard to see on camera, but I can see it. Get you in the right position. And I know we're not at that point on the list yet, but because I'm checking brake fluid, I'm just gonna go ahead and check the rear reservoir as well. We're all good there. So when we get to that part of the list, we can just check it off. All right, now it's recommended that we check the brake fluid moisture content. Now, this bike is 4 weeks old. We know that there's not a problem with brake fluid moisture content, but that's there because some people take a year or two before they end up getting their 1,000-mile service. And brake fluid is hygroscopic. It will absorb water, so you want to keep an eye on that. But this stuff is way too new for it to even be possible without there being a noticeable leak or rain intrusion or something. We know that's not the case here, so I'm not even gonna bother with that. Next on the list is the clutch cable, and it's on there 2 lines. One line wants you to adjust it, the other line wants you to lubricate it. And I'm actually not gonna do the adjustment just yet because I wanna see how much difference it makes just putting the Amsoil in there, because it typically gives you a much better clutch action. So we're gonna leave that like it is, at least for tonight, and do a ride, and then maybe tomorrow I'll come back and readjust it if I think it's necessary. But we will hit it with some lubricant when we do the whole lubricant around. I take the Amsoil in.³ and I'll lubricate all of my stuff like that. Okay, the next 3 items are the brake lever perch housing, the clutch lever perch housing, and the control housings. They want you to check all the bolts for tightness. So we're gonna go through and check all those real quick. All right, those are all good. I just got a tiny little turn out of each one of them. I also checked the mirror mounts as well to make sure that all that is good. So everything on the upper handlebar has all been checked and good. Okay, so next on the list is the steering head bearings to lubricate, but it's not checked at the 1,000-mile service. It does not need to be done until the 25,000-mile service, so we don't have to worry about that for a while. Next under that is windshield bushings if equipped. It's not even on the 1,000-mile service, but we actually had the windshield off earlier today and reinstalled when we did the painted fairing over at Paul's, so we know that that's all good as well. All right, then we get to air cleaner inspect, not at the 1,000-mile. Your first inspection of that is at the 5,000-mile service. Then we got engine oil replaced, which we've covered that already. Engine coolant, you want to check it. You don't have to replace it until 45,000 miles, according to this chart. So we're going to check the level. Now the manual says basically just kind of shine a light behind it and you should be able to see the level. And I do, it's about halfway up through there. There should be a low and a high mark. I don't know if you guys can see that on camera, but you can definitely see the level there. And we're definitely above the cold mark that is on it, so we are good there. Next is to clean the radiators or the oil cooler, and I don't see anything on my outside cover, but this cover does pop off, so let's pop it out and take a closer look. All right, it's a little challenging to get the cover out with the wheel straight because I'm in a chalk, I can't turn it. But you can see I've got a little bit of debris in there, not bad. So I think with that, I'm just gonna grab the air gun, blow it all out. So next is suggesting that we change the primary chain lubricant, which we've already done. Okay, now it says we want us to check the oil and the brake lines, the fuel lines and fittings, and the rear brake fluid level. We already did the brake fluid level, but those other two items we can go ahead and check. Again, that's a visual inspection. You want to make sure that they're not falling off, they're not leaking. There's really nothing you can do. You just inspect them and make sure they're all intact. You start with the wheel, and I just check stuff like this, make sure it's tight, check it all up here, look at all your joints, make sure there isn't any leakage, all the way up to the master cylinder. Then you're also going to check the rear, all these fittings here, all the way back to the rear caliper, and here checking all the fuel lines and fittings right there. All right, in order to get to the rear brake caliper to inspect all those lines, I went ahead and pulled off the bags, the side covers, and the seat, because there's other things we need to check in this area anyways. So if you're going to do the service, it might be a good idea just to pull all that off right at the beginning and none of it's in your way. Okay, next on the list is the transmission fluid, which obviously we've already taken care of that. Rear brake fluid level, we covered that already. Check for moisture again in the rear, which we're not going to do because it's too new of a bike. All right, brake system replaced. Now, not at the 1,000-mile, but it clearly says here, flush brake system and replace DOT4 hydraulic brake fluid every 2 years or sooner if moisture content is 3% or greater. Either way, we're not at 2 years and we don't have any moisture in there, so not an issue. Brake pads and discs, we're going to inspect them. I don't expect a lot of wear on these, but we'll give them a quick look and just make sure there's nothing is abnormally wearing. Everything there looks good. We can check that off as complete. Okay, next on the list is the front axle nut torque. Now there isn't actually a nut on the front axle. It's got a 19mm Allen that fits inside the axle on this side, and it torques down into the threads on the axle, on the fork tube on that side. I have not actually found the torque spec on this, but I've checked it. It's good and tight. I will have to double check that when I find the torque spec. It is not in this owner's manual. I may need a service manual for that. Okay, it wants us to lubricate the Jiffy Sand, which is the kickstand, and then lubricate the brake and clutch controls, and then rear wheel spoke tightness if equipped. Now we don't have spokes. Once again, they have mag wheels, so nothing there. Rear tire pressure and tread, we covered that earlier. And then we get your drive belt and sprockets. Okay, so we're gonna skip the lube part just yet because we're gonna go back and lube everything all at one time. So right now we will check that drive belt and see how it stacks up. All right guys, so there's a gauge right in here with markings on it, and you can push up on the belt. You're supposed to have 10 pounds of pressure with a specific deflection. That actually feels really good right there. All right, so with 10 pounds of pressure, there should only be 1/4 to 7/16 of an inch of deflection. which is about what we had there. Now, I don't actually have the belt tension gauge here with me, but again, 30 years of experience, I know what it feels like when it's right, and it's right. In addition to tension, you know, we're looking at the sprockets and the belt for any types of unusual wear, and everything here is looking good. It looks like the belt is centered in the pulleys, and when I had the wheel up, I spun it around, nothing is rubbing or anything like that. It all looks pretty good. And while we're back here, we're gonna go ahead and torque the rear axle nut. Got a special tool for that reaches up in there nicely. Go grab that. All right, found the tool. This is really convenient to get up in there without having to pull any of the exhaust or anything off. Get up there and snug it down, and that's all good. So it does have a line item in here to inspect the rear sprocket isolators, and they are basically rubber shock absorbers that are inside this pulley where it engages into the wheel. But it only recommends that you inspect them at every tire change, and we're a ways away from a tire change, so we're not too worried about that right now. Next line item is exhaust system, fasteners, and shields. We're just gonna inspect it, make sure nothing's loose. Usually I just knock on it. If you find a loose one, you'll hear it rattle. Most of the heat shields are held on by like a hose clamp type thing, usually an 8mm or 5/16. Go in there and just snug them up gently. All right, 12-volt battery. So it wants you to check the connections to make sure they're good. And it says annually, you should check the battery torque and clean connections annually. Lubricate terminals with electrical contact lubricant. Now luckily on here, without pulling the ECM, I can actually reach in and feel these terminals, and they are good and tight, so we're not gonna worry too much about that. My voltmeter reads accurately, so we're not gonna worry too much about that either. Everything there looks good. Okay, the next line item is spark plugs. The action would be to replace, and it says replace spark plugs every 2 years or every 30,000 miles, whichever comes first. Obviously, we're nowhere near that at the 1,000-mile service and 1 month old. All right, fuel door hinge and latch. It wants you to lubricate it, so we'll hit that when we go through with the lube in just a minute. Front forks, rebuild is the action, and it is not due until the 50,000-mile service, so nothing we need to really do right there. All right, next line is fuel filter. The action is to replace it. It says replace the fuel filter element every 100,000 miles. And the final line item says component and system function. The action needed is road test. So, like I said, it's my bike, so I know it all works. That's it, guys. We went through the entire list. Pretty simple. You can do this at home if you want to. Now, guys, I'm actually a little bit surprised that it wasn't on this list, but typically there is a line item that says check critical fasteners. That would be like your brake caliper bolts, your shock bolts, floorboard bolts, stuff like that, handlebar bolts. So just use some common sense, guys. Walk around your bike if you're going to do the service yourself, and just make sure that nothing is loose, nothing is falling off, nothing is rattling. You should be good. And another thing I noticed on my bike is the rear foot pegs. Now, I don't use them that often, but they've kind of tilted forward. Now, I stand up on them sometimes when I'm riding, and I guess they just weren't tight enough. So that wasn't on the list of things to check, but again, use some common sense. If it's a critical fastener, just go through and check it. So I'm going to make some adjustments there, and then we'll be done. And guys, having Monte put that 117 in the red on there, filling that, it just goes with the rest of the theme of the other red details. Works perfect. All right, guys, so it's been a little while since we finished up that 1,000-mile service on Dr. Evil. We are now sitting in Maryville, Tennessee, waiting out this storm for the Smoky Mountain Bike Week to begin. And as I was editing the video, I realized I never really closed it out or said any final statements. But I just wanted to be clear that if you wanted to do the 1,000-mile service yourself, it's not hard. It's all laid out there, a little bit of common sense, you can get it done. The big things is the oil. So the only money you would spend is on the product for your oil change. Now, obviously, I'm always going to recommend Amsoil products because I know that they're the best. But with that said, I know that there's some people that do prefer other products, usually not based on performance, just based on kind of what they were told or because it's cheap. But the thing is, you want to get those oils out of there and then basically do a safety inspection, make sure that everything is top-notch condition. Dealership charges sometimes $700-800 for a service like this. We only charge $299. If you did it yourself, you can do it even cheaper. Guys, I hope this video was useful to you, and if you liked it, please hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And until the next time I see you, keep those engines running.